you. Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Shabana. I am the Grants Director at the Access to Justice Foundation, and we will be doing a session this morning about the Improving Lives Through Advice grant programme. As I've just stated, we're going to be recording the session and we will make it available on our website soon after. And we will also update any frequently asked questions or any guidance as needed following the session. Due to the high numbers of attendees that are here today, please can everyone mute? And if you have any questions while we're going through the session, please do put them in the chat. And there will be time later for us to then address these. For any questions that we can't answer or unable to get to, we will address these separately outside of the session and come back. As you will see, there's a lot of attendees here today, so we may not be able to answer every question with the hour that we have. So today we're here to talk about the Improving Lives Through Advice programme, which for the purposes of time and speed, I will be calling ILTA from this point onwards. So we're here to talk about the ILTA programme. I'm going to talk through briefly the aims and objectives, some of the key information, and then my colleague Tia will be going through the expression of interest form. And then we will have time for our Q&A for answering some of these questions that will no doubt come up in the chat. So I'd like to say, obviously, that this funding is thanks to the National Lottery Community Fund and National Lottery Players. So we're really pleased to be able to launch ILTA with support from the Community Justice Fund. So this is a 5-year core costs grant programme, which will run from 2024 to 2029. And there is approximately 27.4 million available in funding over 2 grant rounds. So the overarching aim of this programme is to improve and sustain access to specialist social welfare legal advice across England, which I'm sure you will have seen detailed in guidance available on the website. This is core funding, so we're funding organisations, not projects or services, so please bear this in mind when applying. And the focus is on sustaining or increasing access to specialist advice for marginalised communities. So we want to work with organisations who are ensuring they're embedded within their communities and are working with these communities to understand barriers to accessing advice services and who are making efforts to reach those who may be disadvantaged or marginalised. We want to work with grantees to demonstrate how advice transforms lives and supports families, individuals and communities. So we want to show the impact that we know advice has. We want to be able to demonstrate that. We want to understand how core flexible funding can support an organisation to respond to the needs of their communities. We want to work with organisations that have a commitment to learning and sharing what works and what doesn't over the grant term. So as you will have seen, core funding can be used to provide resource, capacity, infrastructure to engage in work, whether it's partnerships, making links into communities, developing approaches, and we're really interested to follow this journey over the 5-year grant period. So as you can imagine, there's a real emphasis and importance for learning, and we will be developing a monitoring and evaluation framework working with grantees over the grant period to really capture what works and what doesn't. And we'll be looking to provide opportunities to share insight, whether that's through forums or workshops. So we understand that this is a journey and everyone will be at different points on this journey. We want to be able to capture that learning over the grant period, recognising that things may change over time. So the purpose of the evaluation, which may help as well when it comes to the thinking behind the aims and objectives of the fund, is that we want to establish the impact of specialist legal advice on the lives of people in marginalised communities, including what kinds of interventions work best. And secondly, we want to find out whether and how core cost funding helps specialist advice organisations to increase their capacity, partnership working for fundraising, and for meeting community needs through increased reach. So the key criteria, I know this is in the guidance, but I'm happy to just briefly go over the key criteria is that you are offering specialist legal advice. And as you'll see, there's details around the definition within the guidance document. There will be 2 rounds of funding. So details of round 2 will be available soon. We're aiming to fund approximately 75 grantees across both rounds. So I think there'll be a maximum of 40 grantees, 40 funded organisations from round 1. So I think it's really important to bear that in mind when applying, especially given, as we can see today, such a high number of interest in this opportunity. It's going to be really competitive. We're expecting a high number of expressions of interests. And while this is a really exciting opportunity and we're really pleased to be able to offer core funding, we're really aware that this funding is not going to resolve the significant funding gap being faced by the legal advice sector. And we'll not necessarily be able to fund every region of England. It just won't be possible. So, as with every funding round, we know that we'll need to make tough, difficult decisions, and there may be organisations that meet the criteria, but that we're simply unable to fund. So, with that in mind, just to reiterate that if you are a current or a previous grantee with the Access to Justice Foundation or the National Lottery Community Foundation, the National Lottery Community Fund, you can still apply for ILTA. What you'll need to ensure is that there's no duplication in the use of the funds. And if you are successful in getting through to the application stage, you will need to demonstrate and provide information on your other funding sources and the purposes of that funding to ensure there's no duplication. And something else also important to point out is that this funding cannot be used for matters covered by the legal aid scheme. So while this is core funding, it can be used for things outside of that and to support sustaining your organisation. So some of the key dates, again, we've made this available in the guidance, but the expression of interest round closes at 4 p.m. on the 15th of September. We will not accept anything after 4 p.m. on the 15th. We will be assessing the expressions of interest and we will then be coming back to organisations with a decision early in October, and the successful organisations will then be invited to the application stage, which will open on the 9th of October. Grants, we're aiming for grants to be in place by the 1st of March 2024. As I've mentioned previously, there will be a round 2 with details to follow very soon, and this will open at the end of 2023 and will focus on prioritising organisations led by and for marginalised communities. So some of the sort of practicalities, if you need the application form or would like it in an alternative format, please contact us. My colleague Jira will be putting our grants mailbox, our email address in the chat. If you'd like to see the expression of interest in an offline format, we can provide that. However, we will ask that you submit that online where possible. And I know this seems obvious, but I cannot stress enough the importance of reading the FAQs and the guidance before completing the form. The form can be saved, so you can come back to it. And we've tried to keep it as relatively straightforward and simple as we can for the expression of interest. So I'm going to stop there and I'm going to now hand over to my colleague Tia, who's going to talk in a little bit more detail about the expression of interest form. Thank you.
Thanks, Shabana. Hi, everybody. So I'm Sirentia Booth-Roberts, and I am the Grants Manager at the Access to Justice Foundation. As Shabana highlighted, I'm just going to go through the expressions of interest form. You can access the online form by going to the Community Justice Fund website, which I'm sure you've seen with all the guidance. And at the very top, you'll see there's a link where you can click to apply, and that will take you through to this online expressions of interest form. So the first part is just some housekeeping. Basically, this grant is only available for organisations registered with the Charity Commission and working in England. So for questions 1 and 2, we'll be asking about this, and we'll be asking for you to provide your charity numbers to check this as well. If you do not fit that criteria, unfortunately, you'll get a notification saying that you'll be ineligible to apply for this funding. Question 3 highlights any relevant quality standards, staff qualifications, or accreditations. I hope that's pretty self-explanatory. And then questions 4 to 7 are your contact details and whether you've been recently funded by us. For your contact details, can I please just ask you to double check and triple check that you have checked these details? The email address and your name will be how we contact you in regards to the outcome. So please make sure your email address is correct so that we're able to get the email through to you. With the question relating to whether you had funding from the foundation in the past, you can tick all that apply there. And if you haven't, that's fine to not tick anything either as well. The next part goes through services relating to regional and areas of law that your organisation work with. Please feel free to tick all that apply. So with both the region and the areas of law, please feel free to just tick through whatever applies to the work that your organisation does. Question 10 talks about finances, so income, expenditure, non-committed cash reserves, and if they equate to 3 months or more operating costs. Hopefully, again, that's self-explanatory. Please put in those details and tick whether they equate to 3 or more months operating costs. Now, this is where the expressions of interest form gets a little bit more interesting. So the next part, after we've gotten all that information from you so that we can contact you, we want to hear about how much funding you would like to apply for, and 3 questions makes up the expressions of interest form. So this is a core grant. So we'd like you to say the amount that you'd like to apply for over the 5 years. So it's really, really important, not yearly, over the 5 years. And you'll need to refer to the bands in the guidance depending on your annual income as to how much you can apply for. Please feel free to look through the guidance and just make sure that what you're applying for fits within the bands. And then, as I said, 3 questions. So what do we want to see covered in each answer, sorry. Please read the questions and think about how you can demonstrate that your organisation meets the aims of this fund. We cannot stress anymore, but please be specific and answer the question and focus on what sets your organisation apart. Please answer the questions fully, honestly, and in a way which highlights the impact of what you do and the difference this makes to the communities that you work with or aim to support. So questions 11, and which is split up in a couple of ways, and 12 are the 3 questions that we're asking as part of the expressions of interest. So 11.2 asks about the specialist social welfare legal advice that you provide. So you need to describe how you meet this criteria. You need to demonstrate your track record of delivering this specialist legal advice. So tell us about the specialist nature of your services and highlight any examples that you have to show us this. Please be succinct. Don't waste your words unnecessarily. We understand the issues like the sector faces, the value of advice, LASPO, etc. So please just focus on what sets your organisation apart and be succinct in your answers. We'd like you to make sure that you highlight your impact and use your word count accordingly. And just also bear in mind that decisions are made on the information contained in this EOI form only, not on what funders may know about you from the past. So please, again, try to be concise in your explanation of this. Questions 11.3 and 11.4. We're asking you what you'll use the funding for and the difference it'll make to both your organisation and the communities that you seek to help. So this is a perfect example of a question that has 2 parts. Please make sure you answer both parts distinctly. If it would be helpful for you, you can use the bullet points as a kind of a heading guide, or use numbers to make your answers clear as to which parts you're answering. But just make sure that you answer all parts of that question. Finally, question 12 talks about how you meet the priorities for ILTA. We emphasize them that all of the priorities listed A to F in question 12 need to be covered, but please be clear which to answer. Please be clear to highlight which ones you're referencing in your answer. So again, another example of when you're talking about a priority, you may want to say that this is priority A to F and highlight that so that we know which one you're talking about. We also mentioned this question about how you're working towards these priorities, so that's also important. We recognize that organizations may be at different stages of their journey with the priorities, and that's okay. Just be clear about this when you're completing each answer and indicate where you are in this journey and what you will be doing with the funding to help you achieve this. Again, I know Shabana highlighted this already, but remember that there are far more applications and there is money available. So focus on what sets your organization apart and makes your services more critical. Last couple of points just on the practicalities. Once you've filled in the EOI form, again, as Shabana highlighted, there is a link in the guidance document. So when you click apply for a grant and you see all the guidance document, there is a link to an offline copy of the EOI form, but we will need you to complete the online application form for the EOI. Once you've filled in all of that information, please make sure that you click confirm in the form, and this ensures that the application will reach us. After you've clicked confirm, you'll get a message that tells you that you'll be emailed a PDF copy of this completed EOI form. If you haven't received this email, please check your spam folders. It could take a little bit of time to get through. Otherwise, please feel free to email grants@atjf.org.uk if you have any questions, and this includes obviously questions on ILTA as well as any tech questions, and one of the team will be able to help support you. I think that's everything, so I will hand over to Shabana to take any Q&As.
Thank you, Tia. So what we're going to do is we're asking for those that have just joined or have joined partway through, we have recorded the session and we will be making it available on our website, and we'll also update the FAQs or guidance as needed. What we're going to do is, because there are so many of you here today, we're asking that all questions go into the chat, please, and then we will be going through them in a particular order. Where we may be unable to answer the question or get through it today, we will come back to you because we are recording it. So I'm going to now bring in my colleague Jaira, who's been monitoring the chat. Jaira, if you'd like to, actually, before you do that, we had some questions that came in prior to the session. So what I wanted to do is start there. So we had a question around round 2 and round 1. And as I've said, round 1, as detailed in the guidance, is for organisations offering specialist legal advice. Now, it may be that it's only a part of what you do, and that's fine. If specialist advice is one area of services that your organisation offers. We also recognise this may include organisations that are supporting and working with specific communities or groups of people. Please ensure when you're completing the form you provide information as requested on how the funding, as Tia said, will make a difference for your organisation, but also the communities you work with. Now, round 2 will prioritise organisations led by and for marginalised communities, working to improve or sustain access to specialist legal advice. So this means that organisations in round 2 may not necessarily be delivering advice services, but will need to demonstrate they are working or have plans to work with specialist legal advice orgs to increase access. And that's because we recognise that those who often need advice the most may face barriers to accessing services. We had another question around, again, the definition of specialist. You'll see that we've given a definition in the guidance, and we've provided some specific examples of the services that may be offered. And so what we're asking is, when you're completing the application, please be specific. Provide examples or list the services that you offer, the impact on communities when you're completing your expression of interest form. Because of the limited amount of funding, those who can demonstrate they do more specialist work, such as end-to-end casework, are likely to be given priority in supporting us to meet the aims of the fund. So I wanted to make that also clear. We then had a question about what people would need to evidence in their application with regards to delivering specialist advice. You'll see that there are examples. Please draw on these and provide detail about what specialist legal advice services you are providing, the impact, as I said before, and your track record for delivering these services. So how are you responding to the needs in your community, and what is the difference that you are making? There was another question that we've been receiving around the geographical area of provision. So as I said earlier, we can't guarantee that we'll be covering every region or every area of England. We estimate we'll be funding approximately 40 applications, so 40 organisations in round one. So as you can imagine, it just won't be possible. And it will depend on the applications we get in and those which meet the priorities for the funding. And there were some questions about partnership and partnership applications. So we're not accepting partnership bids. However, organisations that are involved in a partnership can apply separately. Because what we're doing is we're funding organisations, we're not funding projects or services. So we accept that organisations may be at different points in their journey. And this may mean that partnerships are not yet in place, but please do detail in your application the plans and aspirations for a partnership, if that's what you want to include, and how this will impact the communities you work with and how you intend to work with communities. So I think I've answered now the questions that came in advance. Jaira, please do feel free to call out questions, and myself or someone within the team at the foundation will endeavour to answer them.
Thank you, Shabana. I just also wanted to clarify that for some of the questions that are most...
The question, just so you know, I know I asked another question in writing.
Sorry, who's speaking? I can't see who that is. No.
I think it's Hazel. If you sent your question in the chat, I put it on the side, and we're going to be going through the questions set in the chat.
Sorry, you're on mute, so we can't hear you.
I did send it in earlier, but I
Okay.
have put it in the chat, but I don't want it to be missed.
Yes, okay. So as we've said, because of the high number of people attending, we're asking everyone to put it in the chat. We're recording the session and it will be made available. If we're unable to get to all of the questions today, we will come back to answer them, so don't worry. As you can imagine, we're quite limited with time and we've got a lot of questions to go through. So we're asking if everyone can stay on mute, and we're going to go through them now. Thank you. Go ahead,
Thank you,
Jaira.
Shabana. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that in case you sent any questions that are very specific to your organization, if you could please send it to us via grant so we can reply to them there instead of just kind of, since they're more specific to your organization, that would be great. So the other question though from the chat there is, if there are not any organizations locally who offer help via legal aid, are we able to bring these services into the application, for example, housing issues?
We cannot fund issues that are covered under the legal aid scheme. So while we recognise that there may be challenges or issues of availability of services, this is not something that we can cover with this funding. So yeah, I hope that answers that question. Next one, Jaira.
So the next one is, will you fund overhead costs to support the sustainability of organizations, both for organizations who have a legal aid contract as part of their funding mix, and for those that do not have a legal aid contract? This is important for parent and carer-led organizations.
Okay, so I think I mentioned earlier, and it is in the guidance. So this is core funding. So and there is a list in the guidance of what some examples of the types of things we will cover, such as those core infrastructure costs. for organisations, and we also refer to the legal aid point. So yes, next question.
Are you able to say how the £27.4 million will be split between round 1 and round 2?
So as I've indicated, we're estimating we'll fund roughly about 75 organisations across both rounds. And I've given it again, and it's an estimated figure of about 40 organisations for round 1. This will obviously depend on the applications that we get in and how many make it through to the application stage and ultimately that we fund. So I hope that gives an indication of if, for example, everyone here was to apply, if we had 293 organisations, we can only fund around 40 in round 1. So we are aware it will be a very competitive and quite tough decision making for us.
If we deliver advice at specialist level, including carrying out end-to-end casework for clients, but do not carry out representation in a court or tribunal, are we eligible, or does it have to be both?
You are still eligible if you can be specific in the application to detail the services that you provide that fall under specialist. Yes, can still apply. Thank you.
I'm assuming this is part of the guidance, but are you considering smaller organizations doing specialist advice work who would be asking for less than £50,000, as that is more than current total budget of some organizations?
So as you'll see, we have specifically put bandings in for the amount of funding that can be requested. So I would say refer to the guidance, which details how much you can apply for depending on the size of your organisation.
Is it okay to apply again for round 2 if unsuccessful in round 1?
What we're going to be doing is reviewing applications. Where we see an application has come in for round 1 that we may feel is better fit for round 2, then we will be in contact accordingly. So my initial answer to that question is I wouldn't imagine that organisations necessarily that basically are unsuccessful in round 1 can apply for round 2. We will be able to identify those that we feel are a better fit and we will make contact. But please do refer to the guidance when it is available. And if you have any questions when round 2 guidance comes out, I would just encourage you to make contact.
Given that it is 5-year funding, how much weight is given to a funding exit strategy?
So I think at this point, we're very keen to make sure that we're taking learning throughout the 5 years. We'll be working as a foundation to support organisations and to support the advice sector to demonstrate the impact and hopefully make the case for future funding. However, what we're keen to do here is we recognise that organisations are going on a journey and that their operations in year 1 may differ to round 5. So what we want to do is work with our grantees to understand how they would like to use the funding to improve or increase advice, access to specialist advice. Yeah, I'm a bit unsure if that question is referring to within the application, but what I'm giving here is obviously the importance of being able to demonstrate the impact of core funding, and we're hoping that that helps to provide infrastructure, but also helps with fundraising as well.
Do you encourage joint partnership applications?
We've provided that in the chat, and there is also an FAQ that provides more detail, but the quick answer is no, we're not accepting partnership applications for ILTA. As this is not, as I've said before, this is funding for organisations. This is not funding for projects or services. So it may be that there are a few organisations, 2 or 3, working in the same partnership. And of course, you are welcome to each apply separately.
The aims and priorities section talks about influencing policy or practice, but funding can be used to influence government. Can you provide more information on what this looks like for the assessment process?
Yeah, there were a few questions around sort of lobbying that I've seen in the chat. So I think it's just worth making reference that we recognise organisations may participate or may undertake lobbying activities. We've been quite specific, and we've mentioned in the guidance that while we understand that the funding cannot directly be used to fund this activity. So this, again, just to echo, this is core funding that we're giving. And while we've said it could influence policy or practice, that could also mean within networks that you're working for. It could be more generally with other organisations. And obviously we want to work with organisations that are keen to draw on best practice, learning and insight that could help to shape practice and policy more broadly. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in from the team, but please do if you've got anything you'd like to add on any of that.
Yeah. Will organizations with 3 to 6 months operating costs be rejected?
You won't necessarily be rejected. What we want to do is just understand, as you'll see, there's just sort of 3 finance questions that we're asking specifically. Organisations that are accepted through to the application stage, we will undertake a more in-depth financial assessment at that stage, but you won't automatically be rejected. We recognise the difficulty for the organisations over recent years and the importance of core funding.
What is the rationale for asking whether we have received previous funding? Does our past ATJF funded work contribute towards the application?
No, not at all. It's more a case of understanding where we have information on an organisation previously, and also as detailed within the guidance, we have to ensure that this funding, there isn't duplication of funding. So if you're a previous or a current grantee, we will want to know and understand the purposes for that grant. But we will be assessing the expressions of interest based on your answers given with the expressions of interest. So if you are or have been a grantee at the Access to Justice Foundation, please don't expect us to draw on any previous history here. We will be looking at what you provide in your expression of interest. So please be specific and concise in your answers.
Given registration with Charities Commission is required, does this mean exempt charities cannot apply?
So I understand universities may fall within the exemptions, and I just want to stress that universities are not eligible to apply for ILTA. So this funding isn't available for university legal clinics. If there's anything more specific on that, then please do put that in the chat and we can address that maybe as an FAQ if needed.
What about No worries. What about organizations that are based in England but have a national reach and client base?
Again, it's fine to apply, but we'll need to ensure that the funding is used to support activities and services within England only. So the organisation will be required to demonstrate how they will do that and ultimately how they're going to support meeting the aims of the fund in England.
How specific do you want applicants to be about how they will use the funding, given that it is core funding and runs until 2029? We won't necessarily know what needs will emerge from the local community by that time, so it would be helpful to get a steer on how much detailed thinking you're expecting on this question. Yeah,
that's a good question. So what I would say is, given the amount of funding you'll be getting year on year that you're applying for, please just indicate how that funding will be used. So it doesn't have to be an exact list, and we appreciate that may change over time. However, it would be useful to know if this is going to pay for salaries, this is going to cover rent, which core costs you're imagining that you'll be using this for, again, given that it isn't projects or services. So we appreciate that you may not be able to give an exact list, but it would be really good for us to understand how you're aiming to use the funding. But I suppose I'd say more importantly, the difference that will make for your organisation and for the communities you work with. That's what we're interested in, organisations that are going to make the best use of their resources and offer value for money, but also have an impact in their communities. That's really what we want to try and understand. And it may be that you're doing this already. I want to expand the work that you're doing, or it may simply be that you have an aspiration and you would like to you'd like to deepen or delve into this work more. And we just ask that you're quite specific in understanding what sets your organisation apart and how you're going to work with communities.
If the organization is newly established and thus does not have any track record, but has an employed legal advisor with considerable specialist experience, would this be acceptable?
I would say there is a need to demonstrate the knowledge around specialist legal advice. So what's the track record of that service? And that will be important. That will be an important consideration. And also, what's the impact that you're having? Who are the beneficiaries that you're working with? So that will be important. It's always difficult to say without seeing an application, and obviously you can't do that until the deadline. So we are expecting it to be highly competitive. So it is important that you're able to demonstrate a track record. That's what I would say in delivering specialist legal advice services.
Do you have a definition of organizations led by marginalised communities?
That will be made available for round 2. So when we publicise the guidance for round 2, which will be coming out very soon, we will provide that information.
Is there a maximum annual income for applicant organizations?
There's no maximum, but you'll see from the bandings around income that we're asking you for that information, and that, dependent on the annual income, will depend on how much you can apply for.
Will organizations led by people from marginalized communities still be able to bid in round 1?
Yes, yes, you can. Most definitely would welcome applications from organisations offering specialist legal advice who are led by and for marginalised communities. So yes, you're welcome to apply.
Does that mean, this is a different question, does that mean that organizations cannot subgrant to other organizations who they are working with to deliver specialist advice?
No, so the aims of this is for funding, it's core funding.
The last time I see 2 minutes go from
Sorry, can someone mute? Or can the host mute that person? Thank you. Sorry, I'm asking everyone to stay on mute if possible. Sorry, Jari, you're going to have to repeat that. I've forgotten the question.
Oh, no worries. Does that mean that organizations cannot subgrant to other organizations who they are working with to deliver specialist advice?
Yeah, so the intention is that this is core funding. So this is funding for your organisation. So you won't be able to, or the expectation is that you wouldn't then be using this funding to provide grants to other organisations. No, so no. Subcontracting is not a part of this programme.
Yes, so we have not understanding the legal aid coverage exclusion. Our field is covered by the legal aid scheme in total, but community care law is part of the definition of social welfare law. The ATJF website says that general principle of non-duplication doesn't apply for core funding grants, which this one is being described as, but you have just emphasized the coverage issue. We don't see how anyone can apply for community care law specialist legal advice work on that footing.
So this is something that's come up previously, and what I would say is that if it's for the core, it could be an organisation that only offers community care as part of their package. It could be a part of their service offer. So again, we're not restricting it here. What we are saying is that it's core funding, it's infrastructure support, it's for organisations and things that sit outside of that scheme. So we have in the past funded organisations that offer community care as part of one of the areas of law, and you are able to apply, and we'll consider all applications and we'll assess them accordingly regarding the legal aid requirement. Thank you.
Does signposting or referring to other organizations count as delivering legal advice for the purposes of this grant, or is it direct provision only?
Sorry, read that first part again.
Does signposting or referring to other organizations count as delivering legal advice for the purposes of this grant, or is it direct provision only?
Right, so that would be considered generalist, and so this round of funding is specifically for specialist legal advice. So what I would ask is, if you haven't looked at the guidance and the frequently asked questions, please do so, and then if you have additional questions following that, please do let the team know.
Based on your experience of other programs, how many EOIs do you think you will receive in round one?
Okay, again, it's very difficult to tell. It does depend. We haven't offered funding like this over the long term as core funding. So it's very difficult to envisage how many applications, but I can imagine just by looking at the numbers of attendees today that we will get a high number of expressions of interest. We will assess those, and then organisations that are successful will be invited to apply. What that means, and what I said at the beginning, is if we're looking to fund approximately 40 organisations, it gives you an indication of how competitive this round will be, and that this funding, while it's brilliant to be able to offer this funding to advice, we're very aware that it's not really going to touch the sides of the funding gap that we know the advice sector is facing. This is not going to solve that problem, unfortunately.
If successful, would organizations then be excluded from applying to TNLF for advice work to 2029?
So as we've said before, you can apply for other funding either at the National Lottery Community Fund or at the Access to Justice Foundation if we have future funding programmes. However, it will be necessary to ensure that there is no duplication in how the funding is used, and both the National Lottery Community Fund and our foundation will be ensuring that checks are in place for how any funding that you have and how that will be used. But the short answer is you can still apply.
Thank you. Is there a way to include additional documents as part of the EOI? We have just completed an independent evaluation of our advocacy service, which would potentially support our application.
So at this stage, at the expression of interest, the answer is no. We want you just to answer the questions. It's quite short form. I think there are 3 questions, and obviously there are certain parts to each of those questions. If necessary, and you want to copy and paste or take elements out of an existing document, please do. Please do not attach any additional documents. We will only be assessing the expression of interest form.
In your examples of social welfare law, specialist legal advice, you have not included family law, and I can see that family legal advice isn't necessarily excluded from your priority. So just checking that work with LIP and family law is covered by this funding.
I think we can say yes, can't we? And we were aware that that wasn't provided on the list. It's now showing on the website. So yes, we will welcome applications from organisations working in family law.
Yes, so someone says, sorry, I'm still struggling to make sense of this. We are an organization that provides specialist advice and generalist advice. That the grant is apparently not for projects. So how would this work with the finances?
So it's core funding, it's infrastructure funding. So what you'll need to demonstrate in your expression of interest is that you offer services, and you'll need to be specific about the specialist legal advice that you offer, those services and the impact of those services. We completely appreciate and understand that this may only be a part of what organisations do, that many organisations will work at the beginning, so in generalist advice, but also offer casework. You can still apply for this funding. What we're asking in the expression of interest form is that you specifically focus on demonstrating your track record of delivering specialist legal advice, and how the funding, I should add, will help to support the delivery of these services, the specialist service, and how it will increase access to marginalised communities. That's the aim of the fund.
Are by and for domestic abuse organizations eligible who provide advocacy and advice work around accessing statutory duties and who work closely with legal advisors as required?
So again, just to stress, this funding is for specialist legal advice services only. So if it's generalist or support that you're offering, please review the guidance. You may not be eligible for this particular funding programme.
Yes. Will you give more priority to regional as opposed to local suppliers? If so, would this be larger geographical areas, northeast, or narrower Tees Valley?
So no, at this point, I wouldn't want to say that we will be giving priority to regional work over local. Actually, what we're interested here in is the impact of your services in the communities where you are working. So please do demonstrate that in the application. And as I've said, we won't necessarily be covering every region of England. It's not going to be possible, and it will, with the funding that we have available. And also it will depend on the applications that we get in. So we're by no means looking for organisations working at a larger scale necessarily than others that may be that may be smaller but are better able to demonstrate the impact that they have and how they are embedded within their communities.
Who will be decision making at each stage?
Okay, so we have a team, so I should say a panel of assessors who will be going through the expressions of interest and also the applications, including a financial assessment at application stage. And with all of our funding programs, we have a grants committee who make the funding decisions. So we've got clear governance procedures and processes in place to ensure fair and equitable distribution of the funding. I'm very aware that we've got only a small amount of time, so I might take a couple more questions at this point, and then I want to just briefly recap on next steps. However, as Jairo said, we will review all of the questions that have come in, and we will publicise this recording, but also update our FAQs as needed. So Jairo, maybe a couple more questions.
Okay. When you say that we need to indicate how the money will be spent, does that mean you do fund particular services or parts of an organization's work, or the funding has to be for overall core costs? Or we just need to detail what those core costs are?
Yes, is the answer. Already. Yeah. You
Yeah.
tell how you will spend money, and then, of course, the difference it will make to your organization, and of course, the difference that it will make to the communities that you work with. What will this funding enable your organization to do?
Can you submit an application for your own organization and be mentioned in another one? For instance, the other application may need to pay for our specialist services to support what they want to deliver.
So as I've said previously, the funding can't be split. So we don't accept partnership applications. We would encourage organisations that may be in the same partnership to apply separately for funding.
That can impact on a community mean impact on a particular marginalised group rather than impact in a particular region?
Yes, exactly that. If you're working with a specific community group or specific groups of people, please do make sure that you emphasize this and demonstrate this through your expression of interest. So when we're talking about the difference you make to communities, it may not necessarily be a community of place, it could be a community of interest, it could be a specific group of people that your organization works with. Please provide information in your expression of interest. It does not have to be a regional coverage. We recognise there are many different types of organisations offering specialist legal advice.
Yeah, and then we have a last one which says,
yeah,
will OISC level 2 and level 3 immigration advice qualify as specialist funding for your funding?
You will see that in the guidance we make reference to this, and that this does cover specialist advice. But again, please do make sure you detail all of this when you are completing your expression of interest form.
Yeah, someone
yeah,
is that saying that just to reiterate, to clarify, they don't understand whether this funding can be used towards project delivery staff. If they're core services, the guidance states you can, but you seem to be saying you can't.
You can. We can cover salaries. So this is the important point. We can cover salaries of staff, and that could be project staff working on specific projects. What we're saying is, though, this funding shouldn't be used specifically for a project, but this is ultimately core funding. What we're wanting to do here, just to reiterate, so we're working on the basis of trusts. One of the key outcomes and one of the things that we want to understand is, and hopefully we want to support, is that by providing organisations with core funding, they are better able to respond to the needs of their communities. So we want to be able to work on the basis of trust with the organisations that we're funding, recognising that you will know how best to meet those needs, and you will understand how best to make use of the funding in the best way to do that.
For any other questions that are more specific to the organisation, please email us at grants@atgf.org.uk with your query and we'll try to get back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jaira. That's really helpful. I hope we've been able to answer as many of your questions as we can. I apologise that we haven't been able to get through as many, and we will come back on the questions that are still outstanding. So just to cover before we finish, I just wanted to reiterate that the deadline for this, the expressions of interest, is the 15th of September at 4 p.m. We will not accept applications that come in after this time. The recording of this session will be made available on the website later this week, so anyone that obviously has been unable to make it or would like to go back through this is able to. As Jaira said, do contact the grants team with any queries. We can't read proposals for funding, but we can support any questions you may have about the criteria and eligibility. If you can appreciate, in the interest of fairness, we won't be reading proposals, but we will try to help as much as we can. If you're still unsure or would like to clarify, please do come through to us. We will review the chat because I'm really aware that there are lots of comments still coming in that we haven't been able to get to. And just to confirm, further details on round 2 will be made available very soon. And we will be publicising once that is available. Okay, Jaira, I don't know if there's any final comments or questions from anyone in the team. Can maybe take another couple of questions. I'm trying to speed through my parts so I can get to as many questions as I can.
Can I just come in briefly, because I think a lot of people
please.
have been asking questions about how we allocate this funding. It's cool, but there's some exceptions, and I get that's confusing. I just thought it might be helpful to emphasize that the expression of interest stage, we're really interested in hearing about you as an organization. Don't worry too much about exactly where this funding is going to be allocated. If you get through to the application stage, we can give you some assistance on, ensuring that it avoids duplication. So don't overthink it, don't worry about it. We're more interested in establishing, are you the kind of organisation that most fits with the priorities we've listed on the guidance? So focus on that rather than exactly how your funding would be allocated. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Claire. Okay.
Someone
I can
asked,
see.
someone
come
asked
in.
in the chat that how will we find answers to other people's questions?
Sorry, how will we
find the answers to other people's questions, like in case that could apply to them as well?
Yes. So what we do after these sessions is we collate and update the FAQs on our website. So this is what we'll be doing for the end of the week, and we'll also make the recording available. So what we would say is from next week, the information will be available on our website. However, if after checking you still have a question, please do contact the team. And we've provided our email, so do feel free to contact us.
Will the details of round 2 be available before the deadline for round 1 applications?
Good question. Yes, I want to make the guidance available. However, round 2 won't open until later this year, so it'll be towards the end of the year. Okay.
Can I just come in as well, and just to highlight that when we're talking about the FAQs and the video that we're going to post on the website, we mean the Community Justice Fund website, which we have been sharing links to.
Thank you, Tia. Okay, so what I will do is I'll stop there. I'll say thank you to everyone for coming in.